Crossover Thursday coming up. Aaron Freeman of Locked On Falcons is here to preview this weekend's matchup between the Washington Commanders and the Atlanta Falcons. That and more coming up on today's episode of Locked On Commanders.
Your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome into today's episode of Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day every day. And don't forget that you can subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can continue this conversation with me over on Subtext by becoming a Locked On Commanders insider. Just go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. And from there, you can text me your thoughts, questions, opinions, analysis directly. I'm your host, David Harrison, on Twitter at DHarrison82, credentialed member of the media covering your Washington Commanders for CommanderCountry.com, a part of Sports Illustrated's FanNation. I'm here with you every Monday through Friday, along with our everydayers. And everydayers, as always, I greatly appreciate your continued support for the show. I know it hasn't been easy the last 10, 11 days or so leading up to the Bears game, through the Bears game, and afterwards, but hopefully the Washington Commanders are going to get off to a better Week 6 result. And to help me preview that matchup is Aaron Freeman of Locked On Falcons.
Welcome back, everyone, to another Crossover Thursday. I'm your very humble host, Aaron Freeman of Locked On Falcons, joined by my good friend, David Harrison, the host of the Locked On Commanders podcast. And today's Crossover Thursday episode is brought to you by PrizePicks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. All you got to do is go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code in all lowercase LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. And we thank each and every one of you guys that tunes into this Crossover Thursday, where we will be previewing this Week 6 matchup between the Atlanta Falcons and Washington Commanders. And we give a shout out to our everydayers of both Locked On Falcons and Locked On Commanders. And if you want to become an everydayer for either one of these shows, all you got to do is subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So, David, we're kicking off this Week 6 matchup, talking about the biggest stories for each of these teams. But, first I'll ask you, how you doing, my friend? I know it was a rough Week 5 for the Commanders, but are you in a good place heading into Week 6?
Yeah, man. I mean, I've actually told a lot of my insiders. So I know you have your Locked On Falcons insiders. I got my Locked On Commanders insiders, and some of them throw me some empathy, from time to time. They're like, man, I can't believe you have to cover this on a daily basis and stuff like that. And I always tell people, man, a bad day in football is better than a good day in a lot of other professions. You know what I mean? So every day I get to wake up and talk football and make that as my living or even part of my living. I think that's a blessing. So it could be more of a blessing, certainly, but it's still a blessing nonetheless.
So let's jump into these biggest stories for each of these teams. I know for the Falcons, it's really about Desmond Ridder and the Falcons offense coming off a good performance, arguably their best of the year against the Houston Texans. I know people look at the score and see 21 points and say that's your best of the year, but the Falcons had a couple of turnovers while they were moving the football. And so in theory, if they had played a cleaner game, potentially they could have scored 30 points in this game. But the big question for the Falcons is, can you do it again, right? A week ago, after a pretty disastrous performance against the Jacksonville Jaguars in London, everybody, not necessarily me, but, most people, let's say, not everybody, most people were ready to just basically bail on Desmond Ridder and declare it over. And people were talking about, trading for Kirk Cousins or trading for Justin Fields, or basically just completely abandoning ship on Desmond Ridder. And then he responded with the best game of his career. And now the question is, can you do it again? Because isn't that basically the nature of being an NFL quarterback? It's not, can you be good for 1 week? You got to be good for 2 weeks, and then 4 weeks, and then 17 weeks. And then, can you do it for not just one season, but 2 seasons or 4 seasons? And, in some cases, 17 seasons. So that sort of thing. So that's going to be the big question. That's going to be the big story for the Atlanta Falcons. But I'm curious, what is the situation going on in Washington coming off a pretty humbling, I guess, loss against the Chicago Bears?
Yeah, humbling is a good way to put it. That's probably the nicest way to put it. Truth be told, full disclosure, I've been saying, when the Washington Commanders travel to Atlanta to face Taylor Heineke in the Atlanta Falcons pretty much all season long. So shout out to Desmond Ridder for keeping that from becoming a reality, because I've certainly been trying to talk it into reality, not because I have anything against Desmond Ridder, but just because I love Taylor Heineke, the human being. You know what I mean? The quarterback, we can talk for ages about the quarterback, certainly has some things, to be left desired, but Taylor is a great dude. Sam Howell talked about him on Wednesday as well, and just said he's an amazing person. So looking forward to hopefully getting a few glimpses on the camera of Taylor Heineke. Unfortunately, I won't be able to travel to Atlanta for this weekend's game. But on the other side of things, you would expect to come into this game, preseason, saying that Sam Howell, the development of the Eric Bieniemy offense, obviously is going to be the biggest part of this, especially against the Atlanta Falcons and all the things they've done on defense this year, and how those guys are going to kind of challenge him. But in reality, man, it's his defense. You know what I mean? Like you would like to say, okay, Desmond Ridder has not been great as an NFL quarterback. He's had some struggles, granted, like you said, coming off of a good game. But the hardest part, like you said, is not just being good once, being good twice, even seasons, going into all those things. But this defense, I mean, we thought that the days of Washington being the get right game might be over. But in reality, that's not at all what's happened. And really, it's on both sides of the ball. Teams come into this matchup with 2 sacks on the season and get 5 in one game. Teams coming into this matchup not scoring, a first drive touchdown in 4 weeks, 7 weeks, 8 weeks, and getting 1 on their first 3 drives of the game. Like, it's just been kind of this discombobulated effort across the board. But while the offense has actually gotten better this season, and especially behind young quarterback Sam Howell, he's starting to develop, still taking some bad sacks, still holding on the ball sometimes. The defense is regressing. You know what I mean? And early on, everybody, media, fans, all kind of said, Jack Del Rio's defense kind of starts slow anyway every year, and then they get it going. But they're starting slow, and then there's getting pummeled by the Chicago Bears defense. And going into Thursday night last week, I did a film study of what happened with the Denver Broncos, who beat the Bears, but by all accounts should have lost to the Bears. And the bottom line was, don't play a whole lot of man, play mostly zone, and stay zone disciplined. Don't get sucked up. They got a lot of crossers. They got a lot of this. They got a lot of that. Don't get sucked into that stuff. Be disciplined. What the Washington Commanders come out and do, played arguably the least disciplined game on defense I've ever seen them play. And why that applies to this week is because I don't care who the quarterback is. It could be Desmond Ridder. It could be Taylor Heineke. It could be the kid from Arkansas. I can't remember his name now. They converted to tight end. If you're not playing disciplined coverage in the secondary, man, zone, doesn't matter. Especially when you're watching Bears defense that blitzes only 25% of the time, which is like 23rd in the NFL right now. If you're relying on your 4-man rush and you're not playing disciplined coverage behind it, you're going to get torched. I don't care who the quarterback is, and I don't care if Desmond Ridder had never won at home, which I know is not the case because everybody keeps talking about it. If you don't play disciplined defense, you're going to lose in the NFL. And that is what the Washington Commanders are being bitten by, giving up 30 plus points on defense in the last 4 games.
Yeah. I think, for the Commanders fans that don't know, Desmond Ridder always wins at home because he's never lost a game as a starter in college or in the pros at home. So we'll see if that streak continues against Washington. We'll get into some of the key matchups in this game, whether or not the Falcons can kind of take advantage of some of those struggles in the secondary. I'm looking at you, Emmanuel Forbes. Is this going to be another rough outing for Emmanuel Forbes? But we'll get into that conversation as we continue today's Crossover Thursday. So, guys, I'm sure many of you have $10 in your pocket right now, and you probably love a way to turn that $10 into $250, and you can do that with Prize Picks, the most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. All you got to do is pick 2 or more players, and you just pick more or less on their projected stats, and the more entries you make, the more money you can win, up to 25 times your money. And the great thing about Prize Picks is it's not you versus other people. It's just you versus the projections. I love Prize Picks for that reason. It's quick. It's easy. I can put them in like 5 minutes before kickoff, and usually I'll go more on Bijan Robinson's rushing stats, and that seems to be a pretty good moneymaker for myself. And I'm sure you guys can look at Sam Howell's numbers or Desmond Ridder's numbers and go more or less however you want to go. So take advantage of this quick and easy way to turn $10 into $250 by going to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Use code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. That's prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use promo code LockedOnNFL. Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy. So continuing today's Crossover Thursday, we thank each and every one of you guys that tune in to these Crossover Thursday. And, we want to give a shout out to the Locked On NFL Kickoff show every single Friday to get you guys geared up for the upcoming matchup. And whether you're subscribed to Locked On Falcons, Locked On Commanders, you're already subscribed for the Locked On NFL Kickoff every Friday at 2 p.m. with the Locked On Falcons. Folks know Jarvis and Tanitra very well from their days here in Locked On Sports Atlanta. And of course, they're joined by Kyle Krabs of Locked On Dolphins and Locked On NFL Scouting to get you guys geared up for each weekend's action. You're getting betting tips, you're getting fantasy insights, all that and more, as well as the local experts like David and myself previewing the Week 6 matchup. So make sure you check out the Locked On NFL Kickoff Live every Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. So, David, with that being said, let's talk about the Falcons, Washington Commanders. I just call them Washington now because my brain just wants to call them the old name of the team, so I'll just call them Washington. Saying Commanders is just so weird to me. And let's talk about some of these key matchups. And you talked about the secondary being a problem for Washington. And, I'm just curious to pick your brain on this. I've watched a couple of games. It seems like Emmanuel Forbes, talented player, but seems to get picked on a lot. And I think the size issues seem to be something that shows up on a weekly basis, whether it's him missing tackles and run support, whether it's a big physical receiver like A.J. Brown kind of pushing him around, whether it's him biting on some double moves and whatnot. And I'm looking at the Falcons receivers, given how much size they have with Drake London and Mac Hollins, Kyle Pitts also splitting out wide. I feel like that's a matchup advantage, but I'm just curious from your perspective, what are your thoughts on Emmanuel Forbes, and do you feel like he's playing better than maybe some of the highlights or lowlights would indicate?
No, I mean he's not. You're seeing what he's doing right now, and to a certain extent, people have to be a little more patient with him. He's a first round pick, which always is going to shorten the amount of time that people are willing to be patient. But he's also a first round cornerback, and cornerback, I think a lot of people talk about this. It's one of the hardest positions to translate from college to the National Football League. And quarterback obviously is one of them. Blindside tackle is certainly one of the most important, but I would say cornerback is probably the second hardest position to do that. And I mean, mainly, and I don't say mainly, but in a lot of ways, simply because you're defending different looks. Like in the college game, you're not getting the same kind of looks that you get in the NFL game. Obviously, the guys are more talented, but also the rules are different. You can be more physical in the college game than you can in the NFL game. So you have to learn basically a new way to almost play the position you've been playing in the National Football League. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't perform. You know what I mean? Like, you do need to perform if you're going to be out there on the field. And Emmanuel Forbes certainly wants to be on the field. But when you're making that leap, you're having to play a different style of football, essentially just because of the leagues you're going from and to. And then you have some sort of physical disadvantage. You know what I mean? Like, the team downplayed the size, he downplayed the size, and yeah, they should. I mean, nobody's going to draft a guy and say, yeah, we're concerned he's going to get bullied. You know what I mean? But at the end of the day, we all were kind of waiting and wondering, like, is this going to show up someday? And honestly, the Philadelphia Eagles and A.J. Brown was kind of that first game. So, okay, well, if it's going to be a problem, it's going to be a problem here. And like you just mentioned, it was a big problem against A.J. Brown, the Philadelphia Eagles. And then you come to the Chicago Bears game, and then he gets bullied again by DJ Moore. And DJ Moore, not a small dude, respectively, but he's not A.J. Brown. And so a little bit of that is physical size, experience, and all that stuff. But a lot of it, I think some of it is confidence. I think Emmanuel Forbes, his confidence got shaken a little bit. And, he ended up playing 24 snaps against Chicago Bears. I don't know that you're going to see him for more than 24 against the Atlanta Falcons unless he's just having a really good game and just showing up playing lights out. I would expect Benjamin St-Juste and Kendall Fuller to be your outside cornerbacks to start this game. Danny Johnson will probably get a lot of the slot reps. And then I think they'll work Emmanuel Forbes in there, maybe on some like third and longs, like 3rd and 14, 3rd and 15. But at the same time, I mean, that didn't go very well last week for the Commanders defense either. I don't know how you really work him in, but you want to continue developing the kid. But at the same time, like, this coaching staff knows they got to win, like, especially Ron Rivera and Jack Del Rio. Like, if there's any coach on this staff that has any job security, it's Eric Bieniemy, because there's some people who think that if Jack Del Rio and Ron Rivera get fired, Eric Bieniemy will become the head coach. Okay, well, you can stick around, but Ron Rivera and Jack Del Rio, like, it's either you're in the same position you're in now next year, or you're gone looking for a new job. So, they got to win games and all those things. And that only brings up more questions on why they even drafted him in the first place. But yeah, no, it's been as bad as you think it is, at least for the last couple of weeks, especially. Early on, the size didn't really seem like it mattered all that much, but it's certainly becoming an issue. And yeah, I mean, when you look at Drake, if you're Drake London, like, you're just watching tape and say, okay, a left jab here, a right hook there, and I'm just going to put this guy on the tarp. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. And it sucks for the kid, but like if I'm game planning this game, I'm like, I don't think he can tackle. I don't think he can win some of these jump balls. And so if he's out there for the 24 snaps, he's out there. If I'm Arthur Smith, the play caller for the Falcons and head coach, like I'm going to try to go after him for those 24 plays every single time, whether it's running directly at him or throwing the ball to one of our big wide receivers. But I'm curious, David, sort of for you, what are some of the key matchups that you're looking at in this week 6 matchup?
Yeah, and I'll say one more thing on Emmanuel Forbes. Honestly, like his run support, I think has actually been better than people expect him to. Like his size doesn't really seem to show up there too much. I think his technique and his intelligence on how to attack a ball carrier has actually been really impressive. But again, in the passing game and yeah, I mean, you really don't have a choice. If you're an offensive player and you got a rookie, I don't even care if it's a good rookie. Like I know, Devin Weatherspoon, Christian Gonzalez before he got injured was having a good rookie season. He's a rookie. You still got to challenge him. You know what I mean? Like let's see if you can do it this week. So certainly one that's struggling. I think we've talked a lot about the defense, and I don't mean to bash the Commanders' defense upside the head incessantly, but it has been bad these last few weeks, so they kind of deserve it. But I think just getting away from the defense, obviously, it's going to be a huge matchup for the Commanders' defense, Falcons' offense. But I'm looking at this pass rush. You know what I mean? The Atlanta Falcons, they're not exactly the most prolific, team getting after the quarterback. But again, I've mentioned it. Like the Chicago Bears weren't either, but they had more sacks in that Thursday night game than I believe they had all season leading up to that game. And granted, we're early in the season, but it kind of has been that get right game. And some of that has been blocking, but a lot of that has also been on Sam Howell, the decision maker. And really in that sense, it's almost Sam Howell against Sam Howell, right? Like how is he going to react to not allowing pressure to get home? But you've got some savvy veterans there, Grady Jarrett, David Onyemata, who's a guy that like I've been trying to get David Onyemata signed on a team I cover for years. It feels like by the time it happens, he's going to be like on his way out of the league. But, again, nobody's going to look at this Falcons pass rush and say like, oh man, 49ers level and all that stuff. But you don't need to be 49ers level to get pressure on Sam Howell, and you don't need to be 49ers level for Sam Howell to allow it to affect him. So again, some of it is the Falcons pass rush versus the Commanders offensive line, which I'm curious to see what you think about that potential. But also some of it is Sam Howell against the internal clock and being a young quarterback and continuing his development there.
Yeah, I think for Falcon fans everywhere, we've been talking about, will this pass rush get home? Because the defense has been great this year. The one thing that has not been great this year is the pass rush. And the Falcons have had to rely way too much on blitzing in order to get pressure on the quarterback. And it's worked so far this year, but you wonder if eventually that's going to be sort of an Achilles heel where, a quarterback can pick them apart. And Sam Howell, as young as he is, has played at a pretty high level that I think he is the type of guy with the weapons that Washington has, can potentially pick them apart. So I think everybody in Atlanta is hoping this is, again, another get right game for their pass rush. They have 5 sacks this year. They're hoping, maybe we can get double that number in this one game. And that has been kind of the trend against Washington so far this season. So I feel good about the Falcons, but probably only because it's Washington and their ability to get pressure on the quarterback. They haven't really been able to do it any other game, but it's like it feels like Washington's the one team. Well, even if you have the worst pass rush, you can still get the quarterback on the ground against them. So that's the only thing that really gives me optimism with that group. But I do think this Washington offense is high powered, and it's weird that Washington's this weird team that like they're really good on the road, but they're terrible at home. That seems like been the trend with this team so far this season. And I wonder if that's going to continue this week. But so far this season, it's really been the fourth quarter that is where the Falcons have shined, especially at home. And so, every game so far has been pretty much a low-scoring game going to the fourth quarter. And that's when the Falcons kind of put it on. So I think that may be a formula for success for Washington in terms of getting off to a fast start. And we'll talk about more of the ways that each of these teams can win as we wrap up today's crossover Thursday. So guys, I want to tell you about St-Juste Medical, who are providing you with the St-Juste case, which includes 5 life-saving antibiotics for emergency use. And you're probably wondering why you need to stock up on antibiotics, but we live in a hectic world, right? There's supply chain shortages, there's natural disasters, there's potentially pandemics that could hit again. And you don't want to be stuck in a situation where you don't have access to these life-saving medications. So it doesn't hurt to be prepared more now than ever. And I personally deal with sinus infections, ear infections a bunch. And J.iste Medical makes getting access to those antibiotics that can solve those problems very simple. All you got to do is fill out a simple online form, and you get those potentially life-saving antibiotics sent right to your door. Everybody should be empowered to care for themselves and their loved ones during the unexpected. And now you can save more than $360 by getting these life-saving antibiotics with J.iste Medical, plus an additional $20 off by using the code locked on at checkout at jasemedical.com. That's J.iste Medical, JASE medical.com, promo code locked on. So, David, wrapping up today's crossover Thursday here, we want to give another shout out to the everydayers that tune into Locked On Falcons and Locked On Commanders. We talked a little bit about some of the key matchups in this game. I'm curious, sort of, what's the formula for success for Washington? How do they win this game? And if you're so willing, maybe a score prediction for the listeners out there with what you think is going to happen in Week 6.
Yeah, you gotta play disciplined defense, right? I mean, and to a certain extent, like that's kind of like a no duh type of deal. But again, when you have a defense that had such a terrible showing in Thursday night, and it's a short week, and then people are going to kind of use that as a little bit of an excuse. But that, to me, that's not an excuse. Like, discipline, you're either disciplined or you're not. You know what I mean? And what the Washington Commanders showed in Week 5 is that they're not. So they got to come back and they've got to play that discipline. And what's going to be harder to do that is, starting safety Derek Forrest, who wasn't perfect by any means himself on Thursday night, is now on IR. So he's not going to be playing in this game, which means Percy Butler, second year, young safety. So that's obviously not an upgrade. That's, definitely going to be something that the Atlanta Falcons are probably going to try to target. If Emmanuel Forbes isn't on the field, maybe I take a couple shots at Percy Butler, especially if I get him in a single high look or, get him manned up on somebody. Behind him, Jeremy Reeves, our all-pro special teams player. And we know special teams, nobody really talks about it until it impacts the game. Well, this, again, you lose your all-pro special teams player. Now the Falcons have the opportunity to make their special teams a little bit more impactful because of that. And now your depth at safety is also wounded. So, they lose two safeties to IR in the same weekend, coming off of a terrible performance by the defense. There's just a lot stacked up against the defense. And then you talk about that pass rush, and, we all have heard about the first-round picks. There's 6 first-round picks alone on this Commanders defense right now that are active. But really, the stats look good, but the pressure rates are not as good. And a lot of those pressures are coming because quarterbacks are holding the ball. And the amount of times that the Washington Commanders pass rush is getting stood up versus the amount of times just winning off the line and dominating are really kind of staggering. People are they're doubling Daron Payne because of what he did last year, and that's becoming effective, which is why his numbers aren't so good. So I expect the Atlanta Falcons to do a lot of that too. So again, if that back end doesn't give the pass rush time to get home, and the pass rush can't get off of guys and win, off the line of scrimmage, then I think it could be a long day for them. So task number 1, again, 6 weeks in, I'd be shocked to know that I was going to say this in August, that defense has got to stand up.
Yeah, definitely. This game is interesting because Washington has been so up and down. Like, when they're good, they're good. When they're bad, they're pretty bad. And as I said earlier, like, they've been much better on the road than they have been at home this year. Atlanta has been far better at home than they are on the road. So this is potentially a game where, if that trend continues, that you'll see the best versions of these teams. And for me, like, I look at it and I kind of feel like the best version of Washington is maybe a better team than the Falcons, just because they have the firepower it through the air, as well as the potential with Brian Robinson, who's a player I absolutely adore. He was my favorite running back in that draft class. To really pound it. And then what the defense has the potential to do, which we haven't consistently seen them do, like, that feels like a better team. So I think for the Falcons, their key to success is get off to a fast start. That's been something a lot of teams have been able to do against Washington. And if the Falcons can do that, then they can stay committed to what they do best, which is running the football. And hopefully they'll be able to sprinkle in a couple of explosive plays off of play action against Washington. Obviously, Washington has given up a ton of those this season, especially last week against the Bears. And that will be their formula for success. And then hopefully it'll probably be a close game going in the fourth quarter. And that's where the Falcons have shined the best. They've outscored their opponents at home this year in the fourth quarter, 41-7. And so I feel like if they keep doing what they do and it doesn't get out of hand, and they can sort of keep a lid on that Washington offense early in the game, they should be fine. And that should allow them to, win this game, probably not by a huge margin, but, like a 27-24 type of win at the end of the day. But David, any other last thoughts that you want to share with the folks before we duck out of here on this crossover Thursday?
I agree with you. I think, like, if you were looking at this thing on paper, honestly, I think the Commanders have the leg up here. And I think the Commanders should be a team that's looked at as the favorites here. I know on FanDuel they're the underdogs in this matchup. I think they've earned that after the way they played against Chicago Bears. But really, that's kind of what makes this team so frustrating this season so far. Is it's not about who is on the field; it's about what they're doing when they're out there, right? And if the Commanders go out there and do what they can do and are capable of doing, like you kind of alluded to, they should certainly beat the Atlanta Falcons. But if they don't, and they let the Falcons get on to a fast start, or they let them hang in too long, then certainly, the Atlanta Falcons, they've got a winning record for a reason, no matter what anybody expects from them. How about the Falcons and Buccaneers kind of flipping the script on what everybody expected out of the NFC South, man?
Yeah, I look forward to chatting with you next week about those Tampa Bay Buccaneers when we do.
Oh, that'll be James. James is doing crossovers this year, but believe me, I'm in his ear as he preps for the crossover. So some of what he says will come from me.
Okay. Well, I thought we would do this again, David, and I'm disappointed that we will not get the home and home 2 weeks in a row for that. But I look forward to that chat with James. But we, in the meantime, look forward to this upcoming matchup on Sunday between the Falcons and Commanders. And I think it's going to be an interesting game, regardless of how it all plays out. You just don't really know what you're going to get with either one of these teams, and that can be extremely frustrating, but it also can be very exciting. So we look forward to that matchup. Make sure you guys tune in and keep it locked here on both Locked On Falcons and Locked On Commanders as your first listen. And of course, check out Locked On NFL as your second listen. It's all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.